Okay, so Jenny's asked me to give a talk today after she saw a piece of embroidery that I'd done, I think, online, which was based on some historical maps of Meersbrook. So she was interested in the process of using maps and the archive material to produce the work. So this, I can't show it online, but this is the piece of work that she saw that I'm talking about. So just first off, I'm not a historian, just in case I offend any historians. I'm definitely not a historian, but I am very interested in the local area where I live at Meersbrook. I have a geography degree, which might explain why I'm so interested in maps, although we didn't do much cartography. I like walking, and I've always tinkered with creative things like woodworking, silversmithing, knitting. So hand embroidery is kind of the latest thing. So this stitching project came about as the last assignment on a City and Guilds hand embroidery course, which I signed up to do just at the end of the first COVID lockdown. So I had a design brief that an imaginary gallery wanted to commission a local artist to produce a piece of work which celebrated the Sheffield suburb of Meersbrook. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight into what led me to choosing that as a brief, and then how the historical material translated into the final embroidered project. So I was a founder member of the Friends of Meersbrook Hall. We established in 2014. And when we the local kind of people took an interest, I did a bit of research into its history and the landscape around the hall, which led to me connecting with the Ruskin in Sheffield project, because Meersbrook Hall had been used to house the Ruskin collection from 1890 for about 60 years. So I connected with the Ruskin in Sheffield project, which was mainly focused in Walkley at the time, because the museum had been established there. But the project leader, Ruth Nutter, embraced the opportunity to come and look around Meersbrook Hall, and we sort of conceived of some more activities and work we could do around the hall. And we worked together on a pop-up museum at Meersbrook, which opened for a week in October 2018. So I did, like I say, I did some research into the museum, and that led to giving a talk as part of the pop-up museum week, which put the hall in the context of the landscape when the Ruskin Museum first opened, because at that point it was still felt very rural. Gradually, there was the town was moving up Chesterfield Road, but essentially, Meersbrook Hall was in Derbyshire and was part of a little network of villages. These images are just, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this one, but it is quite close to where Meersbrook Hall is now. So not long after the Ruskin in Sheffield project was completed and COVID struck, I started the stitching course. And during the lockdown, I've been doing lots of walking around our local woods at Cat Lane. I'm spending more and more time there. I'm really kind of getting to know the paths, poking around and finding the remains of the old farms, and thinking about which tracks I was walking on, which was identifiable on the old maps, and just kind of, enjoying having a chance to get to know the place, really. And these were images that are in the Ruskin collection. And so Little London Dam is just down the road from where Meersbrook Hall is. So the research I'd done around Meersbrook Hall and the pop-up museum was fresh in my mind as I was walking around, thinking about people who'd walked the paths before me, how the valley might have looked when it was scattered with farms and the fields were still fields. And I was thinking, pondering on my piece of work and thinking about how I could reflect my interest in the history and the landscape in the piece of work. I knew I didn't want to just reproduce a picture of the view thing. So I'm kind of drawn towards more abstract work and textured stitches. So at the same time, I'd also been reading Chantryland by Harold Armitage, which gets a little bit flowery in its language at times, but he wrote a little bit about Rushdale, which is, I live on Rushdale Road now, and this image is one that he drew of, I don't know exactly where along the road it would have been, but and he said Rushdale, through which the Meersbrook runs, just before it enters what was once Meersbrook Park, used to be a glen of unusual beauty, with such oaks as Chatsworth or Sherwood might show, but not many nearer places. And he said that the stream of the Meersbrook once harboured many a lusty trout. Apparently. I don't think there's many lusty trout in the stream now. So this is the top image on the left and the little image at the bottom on the left of Rushdale as it is now. So obviously quite far removed from majestic oaks and the like. So it's now, the stream is culverted, it's behind one of the rows of houses. And as you can see, it's sort of densely packed terraces. So an idea was starting to form where I could represent old and new features of the neighbourhood in one piece of work. So as I said, I've been looking at lots of old maps and thinking about their carefully drawn and reference fields. So each number on the index refers to a field name. I think this was from about 1805, this map. So this is where I fall down as a historian. I've not made good notes about where these maps come from or where they were, what years they were from. So I was thinking about field outlines and how they make a lovely stitch framework on which to base my embroidery. And there was something very appealing about the direct link between knowing someone had hand drawn these maps and been out and walked and measured the fields, and I'd be stitching those same outlines by hand. There's no way to sort of cheat with stitching. There's no speedy way to do it. You just have to work every stitch. And I'd walked a lot of these paths and followed the streams and maybe even seen some of the same trees as the people assessing this, possibly. But so I settled on the idea of using historical maps as a framework. And whilst I love the green space and woods around Meersbrook, I knew I wanted to represent some of the more modern features of the neighbourhood. So this was me just doing some brainstorming, which actually ended up being quite sort of nature heritage focused anyway. But I also put together some groups of photos that I've sort of walking around taking pictures quite a lot, focusing on particular aspects of Meersbrook. And these would then become references for me when I started my stitching. So the public park's really important. So Meersbrook Park, and the bottom left is Healy People's Park. I probably walking through Meersbrook Park most days. And then, like I said, the woodlands are really important. So if anyone knows sort of Cat Lane Woods, there's actually they cover quite a big area. And actually, this is where quite a lot of the space used to be farmland, and there were just woods in the sort of steepest bits, but now it's kind of gradually taking over again. And then some of the historical buildings, Bishop's House, Meersbrook Hall. There's the wall by some studios. I can't remember what the one in the middle, the no parking one is. I think it's an old barn, but it's not public access. And just looking at some of the plants that are on the grow on the plateaus and around in the woods, and then some of the historical the sort of features in the old buildings and stuff, which I'm sort of just drawn to that kind of textures and stuff. So I decided I'd represent the neighbourhood by laying out current land use over the framework of the old field outlines. So to do this, I did a lot of playing around with maps and scales, because nothing quite sort of matched up. I wanted a wide enough area to sort of show enough different things, but not be so broad that the fields are really tiny. So there's a lot of fiddling and printing. And I knew I wanted the Meersbrook itself to run through the middle of my piece of work. I'm sure many people know, formed the boundary between Northumbria and Mercia, and more recently between Yorkshire and Derbyshire. So it's all part of South Yorkshire now, but this historical division meant the maps were quite, pre-1930s, were drawn to either the north or the south of the Meersbrook. So sort of had the challenge of trying to match up the north and south of the Meersbrook to cover the modern neighbourhood I wanted to represent. And I couldn't actually use the map, which is the background. I don't think I had it electronically, and I didn't have the section on the north of the Meersbrook. So I had to use slightly more modern maps. I think these ones were from 1875. And then the bottom image shows an aerial photo from now, which I sort of superimposed over the maps to try and match up what's happening over the historical maps, if you see what I mean. So I think I got this map image from the National Library of Scotland website, which is an amazing resource for historical maps. And they do have an overlay function, and I don't know why I didn't use that instead of fiddling around, but there must have been a good reason at the time. I'm just not sure what it is now. So I'm not going to spend loads of time on the technical details of making the work, but just to show a few images to show kind of how this translates to this on here. I've used a light box to trace the field outlines, the paths and streams. I've used a separate piece of paper to block out the current land use. And then those two bits of paper form the basis of all my stitching, ultimately. The part of the process which I had to demonstrate, and it was part of the purpose of the piece was to demonstrate the variety of stitches I'd learned on the course. And so that's one of the things that they were looking for in the assessment. So each land use was assigned a particular stitch and colours. And I did quite a lot of thinking and planning for this, because it just makes, once you actually start the work, it makes the flow much quicker. You're not having to stop and make design decisions along the way. And I used some nice shiny blue thread for the screens, which you can see online. And then the shiny copper represents different paths and tracks and stuff. So yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I've got some photos of it, but yeah, it's not out the light like the same on a picture. So I painted the fabric in blocks of colour based on the current land use, which gave me the background to work on, and saved having to stitch over every bit of fabric, because that would have taken forever. And the colours actually came out much brighter and intensely than I'd planned, but I just had to crack on at this point with the deadline. Didn't be faffing about. So I used my light box again to draw the field boundaries on and all the streams and paths, and then I started stitching. So once I had that, basically a little kind of framework, kind of a bit like a sort of stained glass window, really, and then it was a matter of just sort of filling it in. So this is the sort of process of gradually starting to fill in all the different fields with what's happening now. So we've got on that bottom right, you can see the black and white bits is meant to represent Bishop's House. And then we've got woodlands, which are, I can't hold it up on point, but woodlands around here. Oh yeah, go on then. Yeah, we go. So we've got woodlands and allotments here. This is Meersbrook Park. This is the Brothers' Arms, which is representing the sunset from the garden. So I was trying to sort of get various things in, and all the brown is terrace housing, and all that is sort of represents stone built housing. So it's a bit kind of artistic license as well. So that's just some close-ups for people to see online. And then some more bits. And I don't know, the colours of my photos vary wildly, because I don't know why that one's so brightly yellow. Anyway, because I'd made all the stitch and thread decisions already, I could just crack on with stitching, but even still, it took about 160 hours of work to stitch that. So like each cauliflower in the allotment here took about 25 minutes. So, you know, a couple of rows of cauliflowers is like quite several hours work. So the cauliflowers are in here. We've got some sweet corn and different things. So that's without the thinking time, the design work, the sampling. So I barely picked up a needle since I finished it because it's still got a bit much. Um, but I'm kind of ready to go back to it now. So so yeah, so that's just very sort of quick overview of something slightly different with the for this meeting, I suppose. And that's the finished piece. So those the bits of stick, hazel is hazel from Cat Lane Woods, and it's got some wool in it that was dyed on a natural dyeing course in Meersbrook Park walled garden. So it's kind of wanting to just sort of keep the local feel to it. Then I'll just finish on Meersbrook Hall. So this is because it's kind of where it all began. And then just a few words from Charles Dixon, who was an ornithologist who was born, I think, in 1858 and grew up locally. So he said, "We had high ground, sheltered valleys, wooded bottoms, plenty of timber in field and hedgerow, trout streams and sunk fences, patches of bog and great thickets of briar and bramble in unused corners, large stackyards, plenty of old sheds and buildings, some of them covered with ivy, and an abundance of evergreens round and about the homesteads, which were in some cases surrounded by orchards and old-fashioned gardens." And I think if you walk the woods and pass around Meersbrook now, close your eyes and take a moment to listen, it doesn't feel so very different today. Use your imagination. So that's me done. That's my Instagram, which I hardly ever use, but it has got a few bits of my work on. And then I'd just like to give a little recommendation for some music. My friend Liz Hanks, who plays the cello beautifully, has recorded an album inspired by Rushdale and the sort of the area around where we are in Meersbrook. So I thoroughly recommend a listen to that as well. That's absolutely amazing, this embroiderer. It's just really, it's a work of art. It's a work of art. What kind of needle did you use? Did you? Well, your finger's all right. You thinking all that. Your finger's using it. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, so at the end, by the end, because I had this deadline to meet, I was stitching for about 10 hours a day. So I had terrible back. I was wearing 2 pairs of glasses, which were rubbing. My fingers hurt. I'd gone sort of skew with because I was looking, because it's there when you're working. So yeah, so that's probably why I sort of had a bit of a break. I've taken it round the room and Stephen's showing it to our online. Can you I'll point this to the wall, that one. The bottom.
Looks amazing, thank you.
And you see the little cauliflowers. I know they're not tiny, zero, but they are tiny.